Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's long-range technical forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided for perspective only, and any decision made based upon this presentation is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that all long-range weather forecasting is speculative by nature. I want to start you off with a satellite animation here of the storms that erupted late in the day yesterday along a weak frontal boundary that stretched from the Great Lakes through Iowa, and the tail end of it actually making its way back into Colorado, where some of the first big storms erupted out of Colorado, then pressed across parts of Kansas and Oklahoma, northern Oklahoma at least, and then got over into Missouri in the early morning hours. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about these storms tomorrow and what they did in parts of Iowa, but I want to focus on that northern Kansas, northern Missouri, southeastern Nebraska, and southern Iowa area. Because as the rains came through this particular region, right in through here, this was bringing some rainfall to some very, very dry regions, some of the driest that we've seen over the last month. I'll show you that in a moment. Another thing to take note of, under the heat that has been progressing farther to the west here, we are starting to see the southwestern monsoon take life again. So a lot of scattered storms on the mountains down in the southwestern part of the United States. But important to see that over the last couple of days, while the heat has been on south of that frontal boundary and in parts of the eastern Corn Belt, things have been quite dry. You get down here into the south, it's widely hit or miss scattered showers and thunderstorms, but southern Texas has been really quite dry. We can start to see that showing up here when looking over the last 30 days in terms of percent of normal precipitation. So we do see scattered about the country, ignoring kind of the west, because this is quite typical, of course, for this time of year. But scattered about the country, there's a lot of these shades of colors representing locations that have received far less than normal precipitation. And why I showed you that animation was because this is an area right in through here, Missouri, Iowa, getting back into pockets of eastern Nebraska and eastern Kansas, where things have been very dry over the last month, some places not even getting much of rainfall at all. And as that precipitation went through this particular area, we saw some locally heavier amounts, but I want to talk to you about some of the struggles we have in that part of the country with respect to measuring rainfall. So this is a pretty cool map. It shows us where all of the radars are across the United States. And I want to point out some very important holes, okay? Right in through here, stretching down to this part of Missouri, right in through here in parts of northern Nebraska, getting into South Dakota and several other places, but specifically where the rain just came through right here. We may have seen a lot of overestimation of the rainfall in this area from radar. Big reason why. The radars that are near there scanning into it scan very high in the sky because the radar beam goes out and up. And as a consequence of that, sometimes we're measuring, well, melting ice crystals in the tops of the clouds, and it looks much heavier rain than actually falls from the bottom. So while rain did come into that area, we're still trying to overcome a soil moisture deficit in the same region, and this rain wasn't enough to completely satisfy that. So we're going to be looking for more soon. You can also see that since the beginning of July, parts of the eastern Corn Belt very dry and pockets of dryness over here in Illinois and Indiana. But some heavier rains in parts of Oklahoma, heavier rains down in parts of the Delta getting over into Tennessee overall have helped improve soil moisture, as they have also done up here in the northern plains. So keep that context in mind as we move forward in this forecast. So what do we have? Well, we have a Canadian storm track. So we're going to continue to see low pressure systems either running through the Canadian prairies, or they're going to be we got one that might sneak through the northern part of the United States. And each time these go through, we just drape these very weak frontal boundaries that generally make it just to about right here. Let's call that, 37 north. And as a result, we get quite a bit of thunderstorm activity along those fronts. So if I take off my drawings, you can see that this morning's model runs here from the National Weather Service do indicate quite a bit of heavy precipitation in this area. This is primarily coming later today in here into parts of Missouri, Illinois. And then there's another shot coming up later on in the week and weekend. But overall, eastern Corn Belt, better chances of seeing at least a half inch of rainfall. Some of these thunderstorms may be putting on quite a bit more than that. In the south, widely hit or miss storms. Remember, we don't have any major frontal boundaries down there and nothing coming out of the tropics in the near term, so just hit or miss storms. As we get over back into the high plains, you can already see the monsoon coming up, so we're going to watch for storms to roll off of that, possibly getting through eastern Colorado into the panhandles. That's also a possibility. But dry throughout a big section of Texas as we move forward in this forecast. Canadian prairies tend to stay wet and stormy as well, and that's been a problem for some of the Canadian prairies as of late. Now later on today, I just want to point out a couple of things. We're watching for severe storm thunderstorms to blow up again in Colorado, moving through New Mexico, the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas. But the remnants of the storms that went from that region over into Missouri, well, as of my recording here, I'm recording this about midday today on Wednesday. We're already seeing a frontal boundary, a weak boundary sitting right in through here from the outflow of these storms. So we're going to keep a close eye down here in the St. Louis region just for the potential for some strong to severe storms. Those storms already through midday have made their way into western Illinois, bringing in some locally heavy rain and quite a bit of lightning and thunder. Just to show you what I'm anticipating, this is an animation from the high-resolution rapid refresh model, and you can see what the remnants of the storms were doing through about noon. So we were keeping an eye here, and what we're going to watch later this afternoon, so this is 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock this evening, you can see them building down the line, sweeping right here through parts of western Illinois and southern Illinois. Meanwhile, notice the monsoonal-like flow in the convection, so we could see storms wrapping around that and coming into the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles as we move forward in this rest of the day today and into early tomorrow morning. So that's what I'm watching there in terms of that near-term severe weather threat. But let's get this back out to long-term and discuss the major things we got to talk about. So over the next week, this morning's model run from the European, this is what it's painting. You can see the effect of that Canadian storm track, the weak fronts that come through here, and the potential for very heavy rainfall. Because as we have discussed, nothing is shutting down that Gulf of Mexico moisture transport. So down here, even across the south where you don't see heavy rainfall amounts, remember, you're going to get pop-up storms with an abundant amount of moisture in them and some locally very heavy rainfall. I'm mainly just concerned about pockets in Texas missing out on a lot of this. That's what we're kind of seeing as we move forward. Let me get those drawings out there because I want to do a multi-model comparison for you. This is the European model through next Wednesday morning. This is the old GFS run through next Wednesday morning. So if I go back and forth, European, GFS, and then I recorded this just a hair after noon, so we got the latest GFS come in, and it's right here. And we continue to see it putting down quite a bit of precipitation. Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Eastern Corn Belt, Tennessee, Kentucky. We keep seeing this showing up in the models here, and that would produce a pretty hot and stormy setup. Monsoon is now going, too. The models are doing a pretty good job picking this up. And this is kind of strange to say, but the GFS, I think, has been handling the convection, the thunderstorms, better than the European as of late. Whereas the European may grab the pattern better, the GFS seems to be doing well with total precipitation, and usually it's the other way around. But I think it has something to do with how well these models are able to handle thunderstorms in their setups. So that's what we've got through the next week here. As we work our way out to day 10, I put the GFS ensemble on the left, the European ensemble on the right. Both models keep hinting at backing the ridge west. So if I just kind of do this, you can see that would be the outline of the contour there, maybe where the ridge might tuck its way west. But the European wants to keep more of the height of that ridge sitting right here. Now, why this is critical is because the overall flow in both models, I'll just trace it on the European, is something like that. We have this northward retreat of the jet stream. It's pretty far to the north, hence the Canadian storm track, and it means quite a bit of heat can build in. But the point behind this is for you to understand that this particular setup is not one that produces major drought stresses. In fact, it's one that tends to produce quite a bit of a stormy pattern, except for the south central plains. You see, I might have gotten worried about that pattern right there producing a big area near the surface of higher atmospheric pressure that would set up here, but we just don't see it. This is the pressure anomalies out 10 days, and yeah, it's a little bit higher than normal in there, but the main subtropical high is here, and the flow keeps coming around this, pumping in that moisture, and if we do end up back in the upper level ridge to the west, we end up getting flow over the top of it. At times it does that, and that just produces a stormy pattern. We've now seen this with multiple model runs from the GFS and the European, that as we get out here fully into the week 2 time period, which takes us out to July 29th, this would be the 22nd through the 29th, we just see wet from the Canadian prairies all the way down through the Midwest and the Eastern Corn Belt. When I say wet, I mean a stormy pattern. So you're going to have some hit or miss storms. We're wondering, is it really going to be this dry in this area? And my answer to you is no. I think we're going to continue to see scattered storms, especially in the Delta and to the southeast. And there might be some pockets of drier weather in Texas and Oklahoma, but I still think with the monsoon going here, you can see both models wanting that monsoon to crank up. We're going to get storms that kind of curl the edge of this, and they may build down into Texas with time. So there's nothing about the pattern through the end of the month of July that's got me worried or overly worried about a big section of the U.S. going hot and dry. Now, if it were, I just want you to see the difference. You remember how I just drew that jet stream pattern? Let me draw it for you again over here. See how it's doing something like that? It's north, but it is not meridional. You see, on a really nasty July year, of course, the jet stream does something like this. You see how much more of a bend to the jet stream we had, parking a giant ridge way up here on the border, not down here where we're building our ridge now. See it? It's right over there. Instead, it was much farther to the north, and this put high pressure right over like Illinois at the surface, right over Illinois, right in through here, Iowa, Missouri, and just shut everything down. So because we still have a bit of a zonal look, which means more west to east flow, it's very hard to get widespread, rapidly developing drought in this picture. In fact, we tend to get a pretty wet picture out of it. Now let's talk about those temperatures though, because today, where that front sits and where the rain just went through, we got cooler weather on the backside of it with heat out ahead of it. As we play this forward, let's go from there into Thursday and into Friday. Now the heat comes back on for the weekend. So look at this. There's a lot of mid to upper 90s happening here and then hundreds down in the Central Plains. But with another system going through over the weekend through the Canadian prairies, look at the North Central Plains. Dropping back off to a cooler pattern while we stay in the low 90s and through this area. Kind of right on the knife's edge of where we got hotter than this, we would be seeing problems should there not be any rain. But I take you out to next Tuesday and beyond, we continue to see that be the setup. In fact, if we just look here at the 6 to 10 day time period, got some cooler weather from the Canadian prairies showing you where those weak fronts pass through the northern United States. Well, we're finally rebuilding some heat in the northwest. Both models echo the same pattern, and now to day 15 we see a similar setup. Now the European is a bit warmer than the GFS is right now. Maybe the European's carrying a bit of a warm bias overall, but I'll just tell you, with the jet stream pretty far to the north, I don't have a reason to tell you that we shouldn't expect the end of July to continue with the very warm conditions. Just they're bordering, for example, in the Corn Belt on being dangerous, but just not getting there yet. And with the storms coming through, that's what we're tending to see. So both the CFS V2 and the long-range European model seem to want to paint this picture for the month of August. So this is July 28th through August 28th. And we see a corridor in through here of just very stormy conditions. We see that the models were initialized this way, but they're tending to continue with it. I still call into question how warm we're going to get out in the western United States. I just don't see a massive ridge building to the west that could bring in much above average temperatures. So I think maybe these are biased a bit too warm. But this in through here, normal conditions in terms of temperatures, I think that's certainly in the cards. And I do anticipate a very hot August, but will it get so hot that it causes damage? That's going to be the question. Now, I'm going to tell you something. When we look at these month-long forecasts, this does not mean that it's just going to be wet all the time for the next month in that area. We will have time periods, maybe some of them 7, 10, 12 days long, where certain regions go without precipitation. But overall, the pattern will be conducive to quite a bit of thunderstorm activity. That's the main takeaway point from this. My concerns start to be with a hot, stormy, and humid August in the forecast. What might that do to crop conditions as we move forward? It's certainly going to make the crop mature quickly, but what does it mean in terms of maybe plant health, maybe fungal pressures, of which you need to apply fungicide, but also issues with insects. I don't study those things very in depth, but it's just got me thinking about those particular points. So to understand this, I want to talk about a few things here, and we're going to break the country apart into 5 regions and discuss this. Ready? So we see this pattern for August showing up warm in the west. Well, how does the west and its longer-term trends look like to support this? Because in the western United States, we got 3 graphics. The top graphic in the next several slides will be precipitation. The graphic that is below that will be maximum temperatures, and the graph at the bottom will be minimum temperatures. I made them small on purpose because I want you to see the trend lines. You see, the trend line for the western United States precipitation is flat, and that's because it just doesn't rain much in the west because of the Mediterranean climate. But look at their maximum temperature curve. They've been actually warming for July, August, and September, and especially with their overnight lows. They have a very, very well-defined warm trend. Is that the trend that's going into the forecast here? I have to question that. Well, let's go from there a little bit farther to the east. And we're going to look now at the southern plains and the Gulf Coast. So specifically this area and through here, which kind of stretches from the southern plains over toward the delta. We do see that with time, there is a slight upward increase in precipitation, but this is oftentimes plagued by tropical cyclones that can come through and change those numbers. Notice that the maximum temperature change over the last 70 years is flat. Where we're gaining a lot of heat is in overnight lows. Okay, that's where we tend to be getting warm in the southern plains. That same setup is echoed in the primary corn and soybean belt, which is going to encompass this area and through here in this analysis. Now, the primary corn and soybean belt for July through September, the trend line over the last 70 years is actually 2 additional inches of rainfall over the last 70 years. Temperatures, maximum temperatures are flat, but we've seen warmer overnight lows as being a more common occurrence across the Corn Belt to the tune of almost 3 degrees, almost 3 degrees during the last 70 years. And finally, I want to take you to the southeast first, and we'll go to the northeast. Precipitation, flat in the southeast. Big question mark would be hurricanes. Max temperatures, just a very slight upward trend, but look at these minimum temperatures in the southeast. They're increasing as well when we look back at the trends over the last 70 years. And finally, the northeast is very similar to the Corn Belt. Getting wetter, small increase in temperatures with respect to maximums, but the minimum temperatures are way up. Now, why give you these analyses? If I just look at this side of the country, we see a pretty remarkable increase in overnight low temperatures. When I see then that the models are saying compared to climatology, and that's what I've been showing you over here, that we could be warmer than normal, we need to be thinking about what might happen if we see a lot of temperatures at night either approaching or exceeding 70 degrees Fahrenheit as you get pretty far to the north into the Corn Belt. What might that mean as we move forward? That's just an early concern that I have at this point and something I want to watch. We saw it in 2007, we saw it in 2010, and we saw it in 2016, and there are some similarities there. But if you ask me what's causing all of these trends, I want to talk about this before we wrap this video up. 2 things. I've presented to you multiple times how we have seen the North Pacific Ocean gaining a lot of heat over the last 50 years. It's trending warmer and warmer. What we have seen as of late is that part of the ocean has had very little cloud cover. The sun has been beating down and the temperatures in through here are getting hot. Now, with the heat that we have over Siberia, what this has eventually done to the jet stream is this has pushed it north like this. And it stays north like that. And that's been the general flow pattern we've had. Another long-term trend, La Niñas now, because of how warm the Pacific is, right now, just with these trends, the La Niñas have just not been able to gain enough strength to be really strong. And we don't expect this one to be either. Last time we had a good strong La Niña was a decade ago in 2010. So when we look at these longer term trends and we see the influences of the Pacific Ocean on them, I just want you to know what I'm researching and what I'm studying so that we can predict how precipitation and temperature trends across the United States are going to change with time. All right? To finish this up, I want to talk next about some things that are changing. I've told you multiple times about how the MJO has been stuck over here in phase 1 and 2 for about 45 days. We are still seeing indications that it's going to try to move. If that dislodges, that means that our certainty in this August forecast does drop down a bit. In other words, the MJO could move through a phase where for a 10 to 12 day time stretch in all sorts of different spots across the United States, anywhere, we could go over dry for a while. Okay. Also, at the same token, wet. We do see, I understand that when someone says that doesn't make sense. Let me rephrase it. If the MJO does start to move out of phase 1 and 2 and gets going, it releases the really stagnant pattern in the tropics. So what that means is, don't think about that map I showed you a few moments ago that looked like wet everywhere in the month of August. It means that every day is going to be wet. We're going to have time periods that could go over dry for multiple regions in the country. With the stronger trade winds that are showing up, we are starting to see maybe the atmosphere going back over to like La Nina type base state. But I still have to see the Southern Oscillation Index get way up here before we would truly call this La Nina, and it just isn't doing that. It's staying below 0. Right now it's sitting about -3. So remember, the negative numbers are El Nino-like behavior in the winds. The positive are La Nina. So my last point is, should the MJO become dislodged, I want to watch carefully what's going on with the momentum in the tropics, and does that change the atmospheric momentum in the extratropics between about 30 degrees north and 60 degrees north, because it will be the changes here in the jet stream level winds that could be spawned by a change in subtropical winds if we should be able to kind of get away from this low momentum state. So if I'm wrong in my forecast and August does not come in hot and wet, it will be primarily due to a shift coming out of the tropics first, with the MJO finally getting on the move, changing the way the momentum flux is happening in the troposphere. So, in the 30 degrees north to 60 degrees north, the mid-latitudes, all right? So let's keep a close eye on all of this as we progress forward. And I want to thank you again for giving me some time off last week. My colleague Bill Chapman, good friend of mine too, I want to appreciate him for letting me get that time off and doing the forecast for me. But I'll wrap it up here and hope that you all have a good rest of your week, okay? Thank you.